In 1980, in a remote town tucked deep in the state of Oregon, USA, 4 nuns from the Order of St. Clair vanished without a trace during a spiritual retreat at a small chapel near the Mount Hood forest. Local police investigated to no avail. No bodies, no blood, no signs of a break-in or escape. Their disappearance became one of the most haunting and inexplicable cases in the history of the Archdiocese of Portland. 28 years later, an aging priest, the brother of one of the missing women, returns to that very place, carrying with him a single, fragile hope. What he discovers, no one could have imagined. On June 17, 1980, a silver-blue Ford van pulled out of St. Clair Convent in Gresham, Oregon, carrying 4 nuns: Sister Bernadette Murphy, the group leader; Sister Elena Cruz, a trained nurse; Sister Judith O'Connor, a music teacher; and the youngest, Sister Mary Catherine. They were headed to an old chapel deep in the woods beneath Mount Hood for a spiritual retreat, a place without cell reception, without electricity, and accessible only by a single dirt road at 11 a.m. A local forest ranger spotted their van entering the area and waved as the nuns smiled back through the window. That would be the last time anyone ever saw them. When evening came with no word from the group, the convent grew uneasy and sent a young priest to check on them. He arrived near midnight and saw the van still parked neatly outside the chapel. The doors were unlocked. Inside, untouched food sat in a basket, the Bible lay open, and a cassette radio played Gregorian chant. Even though no one had turned it on, the chapel was empty. No signs of struggle, no sounds. 4 prayer books were neatly placed on the altar. The candles were still burning. The women had vanished as if they had never arrived. Clackamas County authorities were mobilized that night. Search dogs and helicopters swept the forest but found nothing. No blood, no screams, no fibers, no footprints. The strangest part, no one heard anything. The chapel stood just a mile from the ranger's outpost. If there had been a gunshot, a scream, or a car, someone would have heard it. But that night, the woods were eerily silent, as if nature itself was helping to hide something. The disappearance of the 4 nuns sent shockwaves through Oregon's Catholic community. Prayer vigils lasted for months. Locals gathered at the foot of the mountain with candles. But time passed. The mystery faded into dusty police files. Only one man never forgot: the young priest who had heard sacred music play from an empty room. He was the younger brother of Sister Mary Catherine. His name was Father Daniel Hennessy, and 28 years later he would return to that place, carrying the question the rest of the world had left behind. Where did my sister go that night? In September 2008, Father Daniel Hennessy returned to Gresham for the first time in nearly 3 decades. He was no longer the young priest burning with grief as he had been in 1980, but a man who had lived long enough to understand that some wounds never heal. They only settle, silent and scarred, deep within. He carried with him a small backpack, a weathered Bible, and a black-and-white photo of Mary Catherine, his sister with a smile soft as morning light, the girl who vanished the night 4 candles refused to go out. The chapel where the nuns had once stayed had been demolished in the early 2000s when much of the surrounding forest was sold to private ownership. The buyer was a reclusive landowner named Eldon Cross, known in the area for acquiring forest property under the guise of private conservation. The land where the chapel once stood now lay inside his heavily secured compound, steel fences, locked gates, and no trespassing signs everywhere. Father Daniel stood before that fence one misty morning, holding an old forest map from 1980. He wasn't there to investigate. He didn't expect to find anything. He just wanted to be close. Close to the last place his sister had stood, to whisper a prayer that had stayed buried in his heart for 28 years. But as he reached out and touched the cold metal of the gate, he heard something he never thought he'd hear again: Gregorian chant. It wasn't loud like a speaker. It was faint, echoing as if carried by the wind from somewhere deep in the woods, or beneath them. Father Daniel froze. His breath caught. One question gripped his soul. How can that music still be here? He slowly turned away. But something had shifted inside him, a strange, quiet certainty that someone was still alive, and they were waiting to be found. Eldon Cross wasn't a stranger to Clackamas County authorities, but they never had reason to interfere with the land he owned. A reclusive millionaire with eccentric tastes, he had purchased over 300 acres of forest around Mount Hood under the pretense of private ecological conservation. He didn't host guests, never appeared in public, and left all day-to-day matters to a hired gatekeeper. His entire estate was wrapped in 3-meter steel fencing and thick woodland. When Father Daniel attempted to reach out and request access to the former chapel grounds, Cross refused bluntly. "That land belongs to me now. No one's allowed in, not even priests." That was the only answer he got. But what disturbed Father Daniel most was this. According to the old forest map he had kept all these years, the Gregorian chant he heard days earlier didn't come from the original chapel site. It came from a spot about 100 meters away, beneath a small ridge where Eldon Cross had built his private residence. From above, the house overlooked the Pine Valley, with a secluded garden in the back, and Daniel believed something had been buried there. He had no warrant. The local police declined to reopen the case, stating there was no new evidence. But Daniel didn't stop. Quietly, he hired a retired military geotechnical surveyor to scan the ridge using subsurface sonar equipment. The results came on a freezing afternoon in November. There's a void beneath the hill. A large, hollow space, possibly a bunker, possibly a natural cavern, located directly underneath Cross's estate. Father Daniel knew, without a doubt, that he was standing at the threshold between suspicion and truth. One more step, and everything might come to light. And he also knew, if he was right, what lay beneath wasn't just the past. There might still be life down there. On the night of December 3, 2008, snow fell heavily over the forests of Mount Hood. Wind howled through the bare branches like the groaning of something that had never rested. Father Daniel wore a thick coat, strapped on a headlamp, and made his way through the old trails, far from the main road and the guarded front gate. He carried no weapon, only a small crucifix in his pocket and a printed radar scan showing the underground void. He knew exactly where to go, the rear edge of Eldon Cross's garden, where the heat map showed the clearest signs of a subterranean space. When he reached the spot, he began clearing the frozen soil with a hand shovel and a combat knife. Within an hour, he hit metal, a crossbar, a door, steel, rusted, nearly buried beneath roots and compacted mud. He tugged. It wasn't locked, just heavy. As the hatch creaked open, a rush of cold air escaped, carrying with it a thick stench of mildew, old concrete, and something that smelled like decay. He aimed his light downward. Steps, leading into a darkness as deep as a grave. He took a breath, then descended. Each footfall echoed like a heartbeat inside his chest. At the bottom of 15 steps, he reached a narrow concrete hallway, the walls lined with foam insulation. Soundproof, and then, from somewhere within the tunnel, he heard it. Faint, like a whisper, but not a voice. Music. Gregorian chant. Just like he had heard 28 years ago. Not from a speaker, not distorted, clear, steady, and close. He followed the sound, slow steps, hands trembling but steady. Around a bend, he found a metal door with an old latch lock. He used a multi-tool to break it. The lock snapped. The door opened. Inside, a room. Small, no windows. A frail figure sat curled in the corner, wrapped in a tattered blanket. His flashlight caught her face as she slowly turned. Sunken eyes, skin pale from years without sunlight, but human, alive. And then, in a hoarse, rasping voice, she spoke. "Are you real, Father, or just another dream?" The woman in the underground room was one of the 4 nuns who had disappeared in 1980. As the flashlight lit up her sunken face, Father Daniel had no doubt. It was Sister Mary Catherine, his sister, gone for 28 years. He collapsed to his knees, tears pouring, hands trembling as he grasped hers, cold, dry, papery skin. But Mary Catherine was alive, her breath shallow, pulse faint, but consciousness intact. She wept, not because she saw her brother, but because, for the first time in nearly 3 decades, someone had spoken her real name, and someone had heard her. When police arrived hours later, they discovered 2 skeletal remains hidden behind false wooden panels in the concrete walls, identified as Sister Bernadette and Sister Elena. As for Sister Judith, she was never found. In another small chamber, investigators located an old cassette radio, wired to a solar-powered battery, continuously playing Gregorian chant, the same music that had drawn Father Daniel to the site. Eldon Cross was arrested immediately. He refused to answer most questions, repeating only one phrase. "I was chosen to keep them. They had to stay. They weren't allowed to return." Police discovered that the bunker beneath the estate had been constructed in early 1981, just months after the disappearances, without any building permits. Soundproofing insulation, steel locks from the outside, a cold iron cot, a crude toilet, and hidden beneath a loose floor tile, a steel box containing Cross's handwritten journal. Its contents stunned the investigation team. Cross wrote that his birth mother had been a nun who abandoned him at an orphanage. He was raised by a devout and abusive grandmother, who taught him that the sins of veiled women must be punished. He wrote, "Those 4 were symbols, a chance to cleanse my soul. I didn't kill them. I kept them, to keep them from defiling the world." When asked why Mary Catherine was the only one left alive, Cross simply smirked. "She sang every day. She prayed. She made that place no longer a prison. I couldn't kill something still holy." Mary Catherine was transferred to Portland State Hospital in severe malnutrition. Her bones were brittle, vision impaired, and immune system almost collapsed. But during her first 2 weeks in recovery, she kept telling doctors only one thing: "I forgive him. I forgave him a long time ago, not because he deserves it, but because I needed to survive." And when Father Daniel finally asked, "How did you stay alive all this time?" she simply placed her hand over her heart and smiled faintly, "Because God hadn't called my name yet." In March 2009, nearly 4 months after her rescue, Sister Mary Catherine walked out of the hospital on her own 2 feet. She was still frail, her eyes shielded by light-filtering glasses, and her voice not yet fully restored. But she was alive, and no one, not even the medical team, could fully explain it through science. When a reporter asked, "How did you survive 28 years underground?" she replied with a single sentence, "I prayed, and I didn't die because I never let myself despair." That quote spread across national headlines. The media swarmed. Networks offered exclusive rights to her story, but Mary Catherine declined them all. She requested to return to the original convent in Gresham, not to hide, but to resume her life as a nun, as if nothing had ever happened. The case of Eldon Cross went to federal court that May. Though he refused to cooperate, his journals and the overwhelming physical evidence led to charges of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, murder, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without parole. During the trial, Mary Catherine appeared only once. She sat silently in the back row, but when the judge read the sentence, she stood, walked toward Cross's attorney, and whispered something only the 2 of them could hear. "I didn't come for revenge. I came so he would know. He could cage my body, but not my soul." That statement was later recorded in the official court summary as one of the most powerful and unexpected declarations the court had ever heard from a surviving victim. The investigation stretched on for over a year. The FBI conducted full-scale scans of the entire property but found no more remains, nor any conclusive evidence about what happened to Sister Judith. There were rumors that Cross had left the compound multiple times in the early 1980s, possibly transporting her elsewhere, but there was no proof. Mary Catherine never spoke of Judith, not because she had forgotten, but because some wounds, when touched, simply shatter. In a rare final interview, when asked, What do you think made you different from the others?" Mary Catherine smiled gently, closed her eyes, and whispered, "I'm not different. I was just the one left behind to tell the story for the next one." A few years after the events, a documentary crew from PBS visited the Gresham Convent, hoping to film Mary Catherine's story. They didn't capture much. She didn't want to recount details. She refused reenactments. She allowed only one audio recording, held in a small room beside the chapel, on an autumn afternoon when dry leaves covered the brick courtyard. The producer asked, "If you could say just one thing to the people watching, people thousands of miles away, who've never known silence like that bunker, what would it be?" Mary Catherine stayed silent for a long time. Then she smiled. Not the faint smile of a survivor, but a real, peaceful smile, like someone who had found light beyond years of darkness. "I would say, listen. Not to the loudest thing in your life, but to the quietest. The heartbeat when you're afraid. The breath when you want to give up. The prayer that doesn't have words when you think you've been forgotten. Those are the sounds that keep you alive." The recording lasted only 12 minutes, but it was aired repeatedly on national television. No visuals, just her voice. Rough, low, slightly cracked, like it rose from the earth itself, from someone who had lived in darkness long enough to understand the worth of even the faintest light. After that recording, Mary Catherine never appeared publicly again. She remained at the small convent, teaching orphans to read, tending to the garden, and once was seen watching a raven sit at her window for 3 straight days. Someone once asked, "Do you believe God was testing you?" She simply replied, "No. God kept me alive. It was people I had to endure." The case officially closed. Cross died in prison in 2014 without confession. The estate was demolished. The land became a quiet memorial, marked by a single wooden sign. "For the forgotten souls never truly lost." And somewhere in a Catholic archive in the U.S., there still exists a thin case file labeled in pencil, Case So-119, Catherine's Room. That file was never made public, just like the final question, "Where did Sister Judith go?" never received an answer. The rescue of Mary Catherine quickly surpassed the bounds of a criminal case. It became a nationwide point of reflection about the role of the Church, the silence within religious institutions, and the dark spaces no one had ever dared to illuminate. Many asked, how could 4 nuns disappear in modern America for nearly 3 decades without anyone, even within the Church, being held accountable? At the Vatican, the U.S. Conference of Bishops sent an urgent dossier on the case. Some media outlets claimed the Vatican had known of suspicions around Mount Hood as early as the 1990s, but never acted due to lack of evidence. The Archdiocese of Portland initially stayed silent, then issued a formal apology to the victims' families, admitting serious failures in internal oversight. Meanwhile, public sentiment was sharply divided. One side saw Mary Catherine as a symbol of spiritual resilience, living proof that faith could survive even the darkest terror. Others argued her forgiveness was too idealized and risked making society forget the sheer cruelty of the perpetrator. A veteran journalist wrote, "Her faith moves us, but it also forces us to ask, how many more like her are still out there, unheard and unseen?" Panels on captivity trauma, religious conditioning, and fanatic violence surged in universities and policy circles. Scholars coined the term Catherine Syndrome, referring to victims who, after prolonged captivity, still retain moral clarity and offer forgiveness by choice. But Mary Catherine never attended these events. She declined all awards, interviews, and invitations to become a public figure. In a handwritten letter to a documentary crew that had reached out, she wrote only one line, "Don't turn me into a story. Tell that story for the ones who never got to." That letter now hangs framed in the Oregon Catholic Media Office, a quiet reminder to all storytellers. Not every survivor wants to be applauded. In 2018, Exactly 10 years after Mary Catherine was found, a small ceremony was held at St. Clare Convent. No media, no speeches, just a modest altar, a black and white photo of her in youth, and white flowers laid across the old brick courtyard. She was no longer alive to witness it. Mary Catherine had passed away quietly a year earlier due to heart failure in her room, with no one present except for a candle that burned through the night. But what surprised everyone came after her death. In the convent library, behind a lightly locked door, they found more than 30 notebooks she had left behind. They weren't diaries, they were letters. Unsent messages written to people who would never reply. To the nuns who had died, to her parents, even to God. One page read, "I'm not afraid of pain. I'm only afraid of being forgotten in time, like a silent note no one ever sang." Another was addressed to Judith. "I don't know where you are, but I always kept a part of my bed for you, so if you ever returned, I wouldn't need to explain anything." The notebooks were never officially published, but excerpts, fragments, and quotes began to appear in trauma training courses for nurses, abuse survivors, and formerly imprisoned individuals, as proof of a strength that doesn't shout, the strength of a soul still whole after walking through hell. That same year, a young Latina woman named Clara, 19 years old, once an orphan, graduated high school and announced she would join a religious order. In her application to the Franciscan Sisters, she wrote, "When I was 14, a nun taught me how to write my name without shame. She told me, 'If you learn to hold your name in your heart, no one else can take it from you.' I want to live like her." No one needed to say it aloud, but everyone knew. That young woman had once sat in Mary Catherine's classroom, the woman who once survived underground, and in the end, left behind a light for others to follow. Years after Mary Catherine's death, the land that once held Eldon Cross's estate was converted into a quiet nature reserve. No buildings, no signs. Just trees, moss, and a narrow path that led to where the bunker entrance used to be. Now sealed, but above it, a low stone slab lies flat on the earth. On it, 4 lines are carved. Here, there was once a door. It led to a place without light. One woman lived 28 years beneath it, and when she emerged, she was still herself. No names, no dates, no mention of victims, but anyone who knew the story would understand. Each year, on June 17th, the day the 4 nuns disappeared, someone still leaves flowers by that stone. No announcements, no ceremonies. Yet the offerings arrive, sometimes a sprig of purple asters, sometimes a single white lily. One year, someone found a folded note in childlike handwriting. "You don't know me, but because of you, I know faith isn't believing in miracles. It's choosing not to let go, even when everything inside says to give up." The last living person connected to the case, a retired FBI agent, once gave a final interview before he passed. He said, "I've worked hundreds of cases, some with worse killers, some with deeper tragedy, but never one where the survivor didn't carry the scent of bitterness. Except for her." He looked into the camera, voice low. "She didn't just survive, she held on to light, and when she came out of that darkness, she didn't ask for justice. She brought a candle." There are crimes that can't be erased, questions that will never be answered. But there are people who, by simply living, leave behind a response louder than any verdict. Mary Catherine. And he had he was one of them.